Well, hello everyone. My name is Sanja. I'm delighted to welcome you to another ZUNO compliance podcast. And today we're tackling a very important topic that is regarding ethics and culture and how we can make sure that our programs are well intended, well implemented globally. And I'm very happy that today we have a very special guest, Rodrigo Ventura Merg, a global compliance and ethics leader that has built and led ethics focused programs across Latin America, Europe, and worked in organizations such as Google, Hitachi Energy, and VMware. So, Rodrigo, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sanja.
Uh,
Really great to help you and discuss all these issues with you.
So before we dive in, I would like to focus just a little bit on your personal journey because I know you started your career as a lawyer. And then how did that path lead you to compliance and specifically ethics as part of it?
Sure. Yes, I worked in law firms for the earlier part of my career in the south of Brazil. So around 2008, I had a chance to move in-house with TNT Express, transportation company from the Netherlands that these days they are a part of FedEx. I joined their legal team looking at mainly at Brazil, but the other operations in South America as well. And that's when I first had an exposure to compliance, right? And ethics and compliance. It was not a subject I was familiar with at the time. I had a chance after I was there for a few months to start helping the central compliance team, or the group integrity as it was called, with cascading the code of conduct for third parties, mainly the transportation subcontractors. And that was really a type of work, as I mentioned, that I wasn't familiar with. It was interesting, and following that, I had later another chance to work with the compliance team when the company had acquired another company in Brazil, and they were doing the post-merger integration, right, with doing interviews and reviewing documentation. And so someone from the central team came to South America, and I was able to support that person in those activities. So that's how early 2010, when there was this opportunity to fill in a vacancy they had in the Netherlands on that global team, I ended up applying. It's not a career move I was anticipating or even fathomed as possible. And funny is that I didn't even think that I necessarily qualified, but it caught my attention. I talked to the HR person who was handling the recruitment in the Netherlands, and she just advised me to apply. And probably the fact that I already knew the team members and had worked with them in the year and months prior was the defining factor in getting that job. So around June 2010, I moved to the Netherlands and remained there for 3 years. And that's when I got exposed to the wider variety of aspects of the work in the compliance field, right? Looking at code of conduct, developing the policies, maintaining the hotline, taking care of reports, receiving the reports, case management, due diligence, and so forth, right? Especially the ethical piece. And I usually see all the awareness elements as not necessarily the same thing, but connected, right? Training, communication, all the ways that you are getting the message to the people. And that's probably my favorite part of the program, and my favorite part of working in the ethics and compliance field. And I think that the reason I remained working on that and haven't returned to working in other fields of law or other related areas is just the fact that working in different companies, but within these field of compliance is always bringing you new things, and you're not simply doing a legal assessment and giving legal advice, right? You have to look at a more varied set of lenses. You need to understand how the business processes are implemented, how effective they are, how your program and other factors are influencing human behavior, right? We need to think of how we can foster the right culture. There's so much different aspects of the job, and looking at best practices and how to bring that and integrate that to the company, your organization you're working for. That's what I think it makes these jobs so fresh all the time, even though we've been working in the field for a long time.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. That's one of the reasons why I like the area as well, because it requires multidisciplinarity from a person that is doing it and also the team to really gather around it. And now you mentioned that it's always fresh, that things are changing, and that brings the newness aside from the fact that you have to look at it from different perspectives. So how would you say did compliance landscape change in the last 10, 15 years?
Well, I guess there's always waves of changes and cycles in compliance, right? It's at different points, and depending on the industry, you have new regulations coming over and affecting how companies position themselves, and the waves of anti-corruption enforcement and privacy, antitrust, and all the different uh, um, flavors of compliance come through waves of new or renewed legislation, which will drive enforcement. And on the other side, right, how companies are responding to the regulation and enforcement, right? And that's usually leading companies to increase budgets, to strengthen their programs. So that's something that I think has always uh, fluctuated, and I think it's natural that this happens. But I think that comparing the landscape that I see today with how the field felt to me at the time I was starting, I think companies in general, through all those waves and cycles, have matured much more their own compliance
Mm,
programs, right? In general, if you look at companies from different sectors, um, especially multinationals and
mm,
medium and large companies, you're more likely encountering a program that's more robust, and that doesn't necessarily mean stricter, but that has been reviewed over time to be made more effective and to respond to all these different changes. So that's something that definitely makes it easier in a sense, because you have more tools to do your job. And I think in terms of how the landscape changed in terms of awareness and corporate culture and the ethical culture in general, it's also improved. When I was doing compliance trainings and road shows back 15 years ago, in many cases, people were seeing you and not really having a clue what you were doing there, right? Sometimes they saw you as a type of auditor or an internal policeman.
mhm,
And that's something that I think today, especially with all the different scandals that have arisen over the years, right? It's something that's in the news much more than it was 2 decades ago. So people have an idea, and you still have to give some context sometimes, depending on the type of legislation that you're focused on a particular moment. But people in general have an idea or an expectation in terms of what compliance is doing and how important that is. So that certainly makes it easier to get the message across.
yeah, absolutely. I was prompted by, I don't know if you saw the trend online where we were in 2016 as just us in 2016 compared to 2026. And I do think that there are a lot of changes. And as you mentioned, maturity as well. And I feel also the view on compliance, as you mentioned, are you internal police? Like, what are you doing here? I feel now the true importance of compliance is also being appreciated in terms of impact on sustainability of the business ultimately as well.
Definitely. And as you see, topics like EHS and sustainability, diversity, these are all things that were not necessarily such high top of mind topics and concepts 2 decades ago. And as they sort of grew in importance, they also got closer to compliance. So many companies are addressing that in the same structure, right? So, and there's a lot of synergy, even when the organizations are treating that under different teams. I think there's a lot of leverage you can get with connecting all that, and it's all a part of the. Has a compounding effect on engagement and the corporate culture.
So, corporate culture, how challenging it is to communicate and set ethical guidelines, expectations across different cultures, and where do we often maybe underestimate the context of how local context shapes how things will be interpreted and then implemented?
Sure, it's interesting that you would think, right, that with these context of companies having to, especially referring to multinationals, having to adapt to these different frameworks over time, right, and operating globally, that this would be something that companies would be have already properly handled, right, in their each individual approaches. But I think that's the challenge of doing that type of calibration will always be a thing, because it's not just a matter of the company finding the right balance. I think that's a rising, going back even to the origin, right, of the legal framework that we are building our programs on. That's establishing that, because the majority of the legislation that we associate with compliance, like anti-bribery and antitrust, all these laws in the different countries, what you usually see is this extraterritorial characteristic. So these are laws that are built and passed to apply not only to the territory of that jurisdiction, right? They are intended to apply to facts that happen outside of their territory. And at the same time, the legislator usually establishes that you will be assessing and interpreting that law under the framework, right? The culture and the legal framework of that country that's passing that law. So that's a dichotomy that will be influencing how companies are operating and embedding that in their programs, right? So you need to comply with FCPA and or the UK Bribery Act, and as you do that, you will know that the enforcement agencies in all those different countries will be expecting compliance based on their own local expectations, right? For facts that your employees in Asia and South America have, how they have behaved in the local context under local laws and being affected by local culture. So I think that's always going to be a challenge. And so that there are several layers of addressing that. And I think the legal contradiction is not necessarily simple, but it's, I think, probably more straightforward to address. You have more hard tools to manage it with support from legal and other areas. You identify the differences, you measure the risk, and you make an informed decision. I think the companies can often dismiss the ethical or the cultural challenges that these brings, right? Because you're often dismissing local practices that are not necessarily local legal requirements, or just the perception that culture will have from that expected behavior that is set based on that specific piece of legislation and embedded in your program. So that's something that if the companies don't spend the time when devising the program or when executing later on, that will lead to problems, right? If you take a decision, for example, on how are we considering, how are we regarding non-compliance, right? So if you behave in a certain way that's in line with this piece of legislation from the country where the company is headquartered, or even sometimes that brings their biggest risk, right? The companies that are based in Europe might be, in terms of anti-corruption, be favoring the FCPA as their standard to align on their anti-corruption policies, for example. And then these might lead into some differences when doing business in different parts of the country. So how do you communicate that, right? You have these adjustments, you make the program, you create processes to handle compliance. But if you fail to communicate that properly and build that understanding and trust in the local organization, you will be putting not just your compliance team and the local leaders in a tough spot, right? They will have to find solutions, but you might be losing credibility for those professionals, but also for the program, right? And then if people don't believe in what you're doing anymore, or if they don't see the point, you will be endangering compliance and effectiveness. You might be losing sight of things. People reporting and coming to you. So these are things that the company needs to spend time on.
So one thing was kind of striking from that answer is that idea of building trust. How do you build trust in a way that makes sure that um, you are really applying, that you're finding a balance, as you said, between what do you want to be achieved and acknowledging the local context and the people that are there? How do you build that trust?
One, I think the earlier step on that process would be to acknowledge that, as a rule, people want to comply, right? There might always be those bad actors, but in general, right, irrespective of the organization or the company or the culture, people don't get out of their houses and go to work planning to do
Yeah, I'll
something
do this.
wrong. So that's I think that should be the starting point, and then I think it makes it easier to build this report, right, and not necessarily be looking at your organization in a way that's antagonizing them, but drawing them in. And one thing that I found useful at all the different levels, right, when you're dealing with leadership or middle management or the individual contributors, is to find ways to demonstrate that you want to hear what they have to say, right? It's easy to simply have that formal policy of creating your reporting channels and having an open door policy. But as we've been discussing, right, the cultures will respond differently. In some cultures, people will actively chase you to bring
Mm.
you to your attention things that they are not happy with. In some cultures, that won't happen. So you need to find ways to be actively getting that feedback, and building the trust is a part of that, because people won't necessarily be open to that, especially if there's past history, right? If they already have reasons not to trust the organization or the program. So you need to be putting your face out there, right? And being visible in a way that people understand that you are accessible and open, right? That they can trust you. So it requires active engagement from compliance professionals, and that's getting you results, if not immediately, in the long term. It's the only way I see that working sustainably, right?
You have some kind of follow-up as well, like after I say something, or if once you manage to reach me and I say something, what happens then? What happens then? One of the things is, let's say you have a company and I have a company and I tell you, we have all the policies in place. We did all the right things. We built the trust. We have open doors. We managed to find a way for people to reach us. What would be the first signal for you to see whether data ethics and what I said is actually lived and not just on the paper?
Yeah, that's you have the hard data, right? It's I think the necessary first step to look at what are the indicators you have in terms of hotline reports, right? Case data, right? Number of investigations, the outcomes, and the quality of the information you collected in that. Auditor reports, right? Internal audit and all the different transaction monitoring and other types of monitoring we have within the compliance structure. But in the end of the day, the way you cross-check that and really have a test to all that data is really listening to people. And that's something that simply having like a clean sheet of little reports, right, or things that are apparently usually solved, or positive feedback from company surveys, or feedback from training, it might all look good. But if people are not engaged, if they have reasons to be concerned about job security, they might not be talking, so you won't see that in the data. Or there might be hints sometimes, but you need to find ways to reach out. And that, again, is something that you need to put yourself, if the organization is has more granularity, that you have enough resources in the field, that's certainly easier, right? But otherwise, the compliance professional has to find ways to be present and visibly present in meetings with leadership. You won't necessarily have the bandwidth to get meetings with people on all different levels of the organization, but you must find ways to have yourself or your team present and engaging with people at all levels. And then as you are building that trust, you will start to hear things that will have more quality and that will give you a better pulse check on what whether the data you have is reliable or not, right? And then, as you say, right, there's how you follow up to the information that is brought to you. People need to have this perception, right, that you're doing these in a genuine and intentional manner, right? It's not just creating some office hours that anyone can schedule, or arranging some road shows or activities where you will be out talking, right? But being there, maybe joining operational or strategic meetings from different teams, right? Getting some spacing in their agenda, jumping in, bring some relevant pieces of information to talk to them or to get their feedback on, and show people that you are there, that you are willing to listen, and that you're really paying attention, that you want to hear what they have to say, and you're following up in some way, right? And often, how you deal with that, right, can be challenging. You won't be able to always give the answer that people want, right? Whether if they're bringing you something that's relevant from an investigation standpoint, or just complaining about a policy, or even sometimes things that are not necessarily related to the program, but that you can support them connecting the dots. If they see that you are willingly, that you're intentionally trying to help them, even when you don't have the answer that they expected, that you are connecting the dots and being transparent about it, that will compound and you will be building that trust.
And it almost sounds like you're not using the term, but almost like ethics champions, right? On the leadership teams in different countries that serve to kind of extend the message further to the rest of the people, right?
Definitely. And that's something that many companies adopt a formal program or some time of recognition, right? Where you put this label or you give a formal role to individuals in the organization, leaders or key stakeholders. I think there are many approaches and none is necessarily the best, depending on the type of organization, right, and the culture. But I think it's important to find ways to build ownership for the program, right, and that starts with making sure that people understand that compliance is not just the responsibility of the compliance team, that it's up to leadership certainly, but everyone in the organization, and building that feeling that they want to be a part of the organization, right? That they are proud to be a part of that company. If you have to go to work every day in an organization that you see as not just having the right values, but actively upholding that and caring about the people, that's something that will feed into the program, that will help you facilitate creating that sense that people will be championing the program, right? And that I think it's something that makes it much more effective, makes all the difference.
Absolutely. Now, one area, to go a little bit to a different topic, the one area that we hear sometimes companies, small or bigger, struggle with is keeping up with regulatory change in a way that actually lead to action. So when it comes to all the changes, and we talked about some of the things that are changing, some of the regulation has been accelerating in certain countries. What would you think is the hardest part for the compliance team today? Is it detecting changings early enough, or understanding how it applies to their business, or translating these into policies, training processes, and actions on the field?
Right. That's a great point. I think for medium and large organizations, um, from what I see, you usually will have a good structure to map out
Mm.
new regulations or changing, evolving regulations, right? Either through your own internal resources, right, in compliance, legal, or other areas, other teams that are responsible for that, or with outside counsel and other tools you might have. Um, eh, Smaller businesses might need to give some special thought to that, and it might be more challenging for those organizations. But I think at the current junction, right, especially with how fast technology evolves, right, in and not, I don't mean just AI and the companies that are in operating in technology, but across the board, right? AI itself is empowering transformation and gains of effectiveness in other areas in all types of different segments. And so I see the biggest challenge for compliance teams to really keep up to speed with what's happening internally in the company, right? In their engineering teams, in their operations teams, in sales, right? What new products are the companies coming up with, or how are we selling that to the customers? And if you can have the best program on paper and even the right culture, right? If your team and your structure isn't fully integrated in the organization, if you're not having a seat at the table, at all the different levels of decision making, you might be missing relevant information, right? People might be shipping already some solution to customers without running it through the compliance and legal teams. And that can, maybe you have already seen all the new legislation that's coming up, but if people are not keeping you on the loop of what they are doing, then you might not be able to flag something to them on time. So that, I think it's something that organizations really need to spend some time figuring out and setting up, right? That embedding
Mm.
uh, in the different business structures and teams.
That is very funny because a few days ago there was this. It went a little bit viral LinkedIn post that kind of a person asked herself, if I was to do a tagline for, she's in compliance, if I was to do a tagline for situations I've been in for a few months now, it would be compliance, solving issues that wouldn't happen if you just included us from the start. And people reacted because it was a lot relevant, and you just mentioned similar stuff as well.
Yeah, and that's one thing that going back to one of our prior questions, right? One of the things that I think have improved, at least in the organizations I've been fortunate to be a part of over the years, um, you often came across situations where people felt that compliance was the sales prevention team or something like that, right? You even sometimes heard jokes about that, and I think that's not the prevalent attitude anymore. And I think what I see more often is even when people sometimes are not happy or not entirely happy with the solutions you're providing, they still understand the value because it's not just protecting the company, it's protecting themselves, right? So it's easier to get that type of engagement, right? If you're talking to your leaders and the key stakeholders in the organization and asking them to involve you, at least in my experience, it's been much more frequent that they will actively drive you in and sometimes even try to drag you into things that are not under your scope, right? And that's another challenge that you cannot simply send people away. I think it's easy it bears more fruits if you build the relationship and help them connect the dots, right? But I think another challenge that you can have in that particular risk area, right, of failing to address or to regulations or to adjust to change is sometimes the complexity that we create ourselves, right? And that's something that might be too stemming from being too focused on the controls and trying to make a program as robust as possible, right? And then failing to be uh, effectively supporting the business, right? In the end of the day, we are a support function. We are not there to prevent risk completely, right? We are there to mitigate and enable business to move on in a way that's safe and sustainable for the company and for the individuals. So if our uh, turnaround time on advice or approvals or anything else is too long, or if we need to involve dozens of different teams and individuals to approve or to evaluate a change in policy, that might not be sufficient these days, right? And the companies who struggle with that will certainly be at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So one also key question is, and also because we are mostly involved in the training aspect. So how do we keep ethics and compliance training relevant, human, and culturally sensitive at scale? Because some of the challenges is how, especially when it comes to ethics, how to make sure that it's trained the right way, to people feel ownership, to feel that they are in charge of it, and understand how it actually transfers and relates to their everyday decisions.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think it's one of the challenges, and I think training in general, and again coming from my experience I had, not just the companies I worked for, but the visibility I have from colleagues and other organizations, right, that has evolved a lot. And the fact that we got access to more robust software and tools that helped that a lot. But I think the challenge still remains in terms of how relevant the content we are delivering is to each employee, right? It might be the best training experience ever, but if the content is generic or is not necessarily connecting with what that individual employee does in their job, then it's fun, but it's taking them away from the stuff they need to be doing, right? So I think we need to get right the relevance, in-role relevance, and the format, right? The format needs to be engaging and not just training. I think that applies to comms, to other awareness initiatives. And that's, I think you need to get those two pillars right, and be constantly updating, which can be a challenge, right? You may run the risk of making it a bit gimmicky, and then that can also be a problem, right, in terms of how people perceive the program. So I think it's important to have some strong design principles when you are looking at your training and awareness initiatives, and stick to that, right? So if you want to um, on top or instead of particular format you used in the past, doing something that's like a game or has some gamifying elements to it or some competitiveness, make sure that you are maintaining it connected, right, to the topics, not just the ethics compliance topics, but the aligned with the business, right? So it's a game aligned to the operation, right? Here's some sort of a simulation, or one that's I've seen over the years a lot, right? Is trying to come up with ways of finding fraud, right? Or how, if you wanted to breach that policy, or if you wanted to try to gain some advantage, how you could think like a thief and implement something like that, or even faster models, right? Like quiz and other types of faster activities, and but try to remain consistent with the thematic that's more relevant to the role and to the work you're doing and the message you're trying to get across, right? Also trying to make sure it's intellectually challenging to those that are participating, right? So they feel that sense of accomplishment by joining. And one other principle I think that's worth is trying to find ways to recognize, to award recognition, and not necessarily just by distributing swag, right? But maybe getting a sort of a list of the list of honors of those employees that are more engaged, or creating badges and other creative ways to give visibility to those that are engaged with the program, right? That's something that employees enjoy, and I think that has a longer sustaining value, right? If you just give someone a swag, they will appreciate it, but they might forget about it. But if you were giving intangible recognition and other types of rewards, that's something that's probably going to have a lasting impact.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So you mentioned AI at one point in your responses. You mentioned gamification now, changes that we're facing. So what would be the future of compliance today from your perspective?
Right. I think we are, in a sense, already living the future of compliance, because the trends I'm seeing are already materializing, right? When we are um, continuously adopting tools like AI and um, machine learning and other technological solutions to make the program more robust, that's definitely something that, at least at this stage, is affecting job security, right? And I think that's a natural part of any technological revolution. But I think that the flip side of that is that this, especially for those professionals and teams that are able to really spend the time understanding um, what that can lead, where that can lead us, and what are the positive externalities of that, is to position ourselves as compliance professionals as much more strategic and trusted partners focused on the quality and high added value work, right? So all the more operational and manual work, that's all going to be handled by software and machines, right? I don't think there's any way around that, and that's something that we already see, right? In terms of the lower level advising, right? If which is something that the type of consultation that comes comes around more often in most organizations, right? It's the employee who's not sure if they need to file their reports in a certain way, whether they need compliance approval or not. These are usually things that, if you read your policy, paying attention to it, you probably can identify the answer. But more often than not, the person will not just want to having their own certainty and the policy to back them up. They want to have someone from the compliance team doing some hand holding, but at least to have something they can fall back on in case someone has a different interpretation in the future, right? So that's completely understandable, but it's probably not the best use of our time. And that's the type of thing that for most teams is probably still taking up a lot of time that could be spent elsewhere in where we would be adding more value. So that type of advising is probably going to be sorted by chatbots, and is already being handled by chatbots in many organizations. Uh, and especially given the narrower scope, right? You're not asking one of those more famous models on the internet. You are asking your internal chatbot that's looking at your policies, at your internal database of how you advised on that before. So it's much less likely to give some incorrect answer, and you can have quality control on that. But that's going to release a lot of your time, and that's something that's already happening, and we will only continue, right? Investigations, transaction monitoring, all that can be done more efficiently through using these tools, and in a much more robust way, right? If you usually were hard pressed into only looking at a smaller sample of data in your annual audit cycle, or doing whatever checks you're doing, with machine learning, AI, and all those tools, you can look at a vastly larger sample, and you get that much faster, much more reliable results. And then the compliance professional can have a much higher impact, right? You're having much more time to analyze and understand the business than just looking at a huge pile of documents, right? You will be looking at the quality assessment of that, and not the hard manual work that takes a lot of time. So that, I think that's the future, and especially positioning us as more strategic, closer to decision making. That's the way to go. It's already happening, and I think it's only going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating what we're seeing for what is technology being used now. We had experience creating such chatbot, and it just saves so much time, and it frees up compliance to focus on strategy, right? On tracking and really making a difference to how the business is operated. So
And the human connection, right, Sandra? Because it's a good part of what makes us successful in our roles is not just understanding compliance and the laws, right? It's understanding the business, how the risks, the compliance risks are materializing. And for that, we need to understand the business model, how the processes are running, and the people. If we are having more time to talk to people and build those connections, we will be seen as trusted advisors, as more strategic, and we will be more effective, right? So that I think is one of the positive effects of that change.
Absolutely, because currently now you can tend to be overwhelmed with, as you said, papers or like data. And even if you have that open door policy, you don't really have time to dedicate yourself to that person or that issue that came to your desk because you have to check the box of revising all of this stuff. So, very, very good news for the future. So,
Indeed.
Rodrigo, thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed our conversation, and I just really love that we had the chance to hear from you and your insights over such an impressive career. And I'm looking forward to following what you do in the future. And I invite everyone listening to also do so as well. And we'll be in touch. And thank you so much one more time.
Wonderful. Thank you for inviting and having me, Sanja. Great time talking to you, and happy to support you and anyone who's watching us in the future. Feel free to connect and message me.
Well, thank you. Until we talk next time, bye everyone.
Wonderful. Bye.